1987, Madison Square Garden. I'd never seen this band live before. It's the only other time I had that feeling like the first time I saw Bruce. They turned a giant arena into an intimate room. Number 6, Frank Sinatra, 1983, Nassau Coliseum. I didn't even want to go to this concert. My parents wanted to go, so I bought them tickets. And I said, well, instead of getting 2, I'll get 4 and I'll go with them, because I wasn't a huge fan, but I realized he was a legend, and I wanted to see Sinatra before he died. Nothing funnier than watching 60-year-old women act like 20-year-olds. Before he'd start to sing, you hear a woman yell, "We love you, Frankie!" And he'd go, "I love you too, baby." I am very glad I got to see Sinatra before he died. Number 7, Bruce Springsteen, 2005, Two River Theater, Red Bank, New Jersey. It was just me and 400 people for the VH1 Storytellers performance. There was Bruce, a piano, an acoustic guitar, and his stories about every song he played. Unreal.
Chapter 11. I own Nassau Coliseum.
The internship with WLIR went so well they asked me back for a second semester. I was working nearly every day with Steve doing grunt work like sledding, and he kept rewarding me with more assignments. This was when the New York Islanders started their run of winning 4 straight Stanley Cups. Steve sent me out to the victory parades, where I interviewed all the players, talked to the people along the route, and then brought back a mess of tape for him to decipher, edit, and graciously credit me for on air. It ran for days. I even got to cover some hard news. When John Lennon was killed in December 1980, grieving fans held vigils all over New York. All the good reporters were sent to Central Park, but I did get to cover the one at Eisenhower Park and file live reports from the scene. The same thing happened after Ronald Reagan made some federal budget cuts almost as soon as he took office in January 1981, including taking out a huge slice of student aid. There were protests at colleges all over the country, and eventually there was a march on Washington during my spring break. So what if it wasn't for peace or equal rights, my brother Anthony's issues? It was a cause I could get behind. I needed cash to go to school. After my WLIR experiences, I went internship crazy. My parents were incredibly supportive. They could see how happy I was and knew I was killing myself at school with weekend jobs, at the kennel, at the gas station, so my dad offered to pay for my car insurance. That meant I could work more gigs for free and not have to pick up hours during the week. In the second semester of my sophomore year, while I was interning at WLIR, I applied for an internship at Sports Channel on Long Island, which carried the Islanders and covered a lot of high school sports. On my first day there, my boss handed me a notebook and told me to go up to Master Control and log tapes. I didn't know where Master Control was because it wasn't in Sports Channel's main headquarters. In fact, it was on top of Long Island's Medical Center, the tallest building in the area, which meant it got the best reception. You took the elevator to the roof, then climbed a ladder to a trailer that was filled with high-end video equipment. The other problem? I didn't know what it meant to log tapes, or what I was logging tapes for. This is when it turned into the Karate Kid. My boss explained that logging meant watching tapes of 30 different high school sporting events, soccer, lacrosse, football, basketball, and writing down the time on the video deck whenever a great play happened. Good kick? Log it. Good save? Log it. I did that for a week. Then I carried the notebook with me whenever I came to work, waiting for him to tell me what we needed it for. It wasn't until the end of the internship that he sat me down and showed me how to cut up my logged highlights to create a highlight reel. Meanwhile, here was the real perk. They gave me a press pass for all the Islanders' home games at the Nassau Coliseum, which was walking distance from my house. I showed up for every game at 3:30 and ran through a litany of duties, all grunt work that anyone getting paid would be irritated doing. But I couldn't wait to get there. There were not enough hours in the week for me to learn what I wanted to learn. When I walked into the Coliseum, I never wanted to leave. The first thing I did when I showed up for work was check the pagers all the refs wore that alerted them when they needed to take a TV timeout. I walked around every spot on the ice checking for dead spots. Then I would dig out the Sports Channel banner from the bowels of stadium storage and unfurl it in front of the booth where the announcers sat during the game. After that, I spent hours making copies and gophering between the production truck and the stadium and the press room. I got to know everyone from the camera guys to the directors to the Zamboni driver. There wasn't a part of the job I didn't see. My favorite guy was Stan Fischler, a legendary hockey reporter who did player interviews on TV and wrote for the Hockey News. Between every period, players from both teams would stop by Stan's booth near the locker room and give him 5 minutes. Then after the game, he picked the star of the game to interview. I was Stan's set decorator and wrangler. Before the games, I had to gather extra team jerseys to hang in Stan's cubbyhole as backdrops for his interview. The Islander equipment manager just handed the unis over. But the road team's manager always gave me the once-over, my hair, my mustache, and said the same thing. You better fucking bring them back. When the game ended, Stan would make his star of the game picks. But the criteria wasn't who had a hat trick or the most assists. It was, above all, who would talk to Stan. I'd head into the locker room, Islanders or visitors, with a list of 3 or 4 guys Stan voted as that night's MVP. I'd ask the first guy, can you do an interview? If he said no, I went to the next guy. On and on until I found a guy who would do the interview. It wasn't always easy. One time, Stan had written an article for the Hockey News about which player he would take first if he were starting a team. This was in the early 1980s. Wayne Gretzky was emerging as the greatest player in NHL history and one of the biggest stars in all of sports. He was young, handsome, and well-spoken. Forget hockey. If people were starting a pro basketball team at that time, they would have taken Gretzky. But Stan wrote that his first choice would be the Islanders' Brian Trottier. It had become a running joke with Stan and the Islanders' lead broadcaster always saying Trottier was the best player in hockey. Truth was, he was scoring 50 goals a season and was the glue that held together an Islanders team that was in the middle of a dynasty. But Stan wrote the story in such a way that it was not so much about why Trottier was great, it gave all the reasons Gretzky wasn't. Well, Gretzky happened to read this article, and when he and the Edmonton Oilers came to the Nassau Coliseum and beat up on the Isles, he was named the star of the game by Stan. It was my job to get him to the interview booth. I walked in shaking at the prospect of having to bother him. When I asked him, he said, "Fuck that guy. He wrote an article trashing me." I moved down the line to Stan's second favorite choice for star of the game, but as I was asking for an interview, Gretzky overheard me and he said, Hold on. Tell him I'll be there in a few minutes." When Gretzky sat down, Stan said, "So Wayne, another brilliant performance. Congrats on being star of the game." Then he pushed the microphone toward Gretzky's mouth. The great one responded, "I'm just glad to get it since you told everyone I was no good." Stan hemmed and hawed and stuttered until Gretzky finally smiled. He was a young Canadian kid. He didn't have it in him to go for the kill. Gretzky was about my age, and he was one of those guys who, because I saw him close up a couple of times, made me think I was just standing around picking my nose, even though I was working so hard. He was as thin as a hockey stick, had shaggy hair and a boyish face. The way he skated was inspiring. I was once hanging near the players' locker rooms another time he was in town. Not too far from me was a board for a game that fans played between periods called Score-Up. This was a huge piece of wood with a mouse-hole-size opening at the bottom. During intermission, fans came onto the ice and tried to shoot the puck into the hole to win a car. Players on the road had, and still have, a lot of time to kill before games.